All right, so I wanted to give you guys a little quick video on our glazes. Our glazes come in a powdered form. They're mixed with water. They're run through a screen or a sieve to get all the lumps out. And then basically they sit overnight for 24 to 48 hours before we start to use them. And before we do, I try to check them, make sure they're the right consistency. If they are a little thick, then we add some water. If they're a little bit thin, then we drain some water off of them. So in each of the buckets, when you come in to do your glazing, they will have a lid on top, and they are labeled on the side and on the lid. This glaze happens to be a color called sunflower yellow, and each bucket will have a stir stick inside of it. When you first come in, you may be the first person to use this glaze that day, and so it'll look like there may be 1 inch to 2 inches of water on the top of it, depending on the glaze and the color. So that you want to make sure you stir it up really well so that we get all the chemicals in the glazes mixed up into the top surface where we're going to be dipping our project. So you're going to take the stir stick and you're going to carefully stir the glaze. And you want to stir the outside, you want to stir towards the middle, you just want to keep stirring until the glaze starts to thicken up and get fully mixed. When it's fully mixed, it should be about the consistency of heavy cream for most of our glazes. Now, if it ever seems a little bit too watery, keep stirring. It usually will thicken up. If it seems like it's too thick, let me know, because water may have evaporated off the glaze, and it may need to have a little more water added to it. So, my biggest rule of thumb is stir some more, and stir some more again. We want to get this all mixed up so that we're getting a good coat of glaze onto our project. If you want, you can switch hands, you can switch directions that you stir. Just try not to splash it about to where it gets splattered all over the place. But we do want to make sure it's stirred up quite well so we're getting the best possible coat of glaze on our project. All right, so I think that should do for now. Obviously, if the bucket's a little bit fuller, it takes a little more effort, and it may take you a few minutes longer to get it stirred up well. So I have a project here. It's a simple pinch pot, and this is what I'm going to work on glazing. So I like to glaze with the tongs. These are called dipping tongs, and that way it is easy to grasp hold of your project, dip it, pull it out, remove it, not put any finger marks on it. So when I go ahead and I glaze, I try to turn the project straight up and down like this. I take the tongs as if I'm shaking hands with someone, although I'm more left-handed, and then I go ahead and I just grasp the top part. I like to grasp the top part because then when I dip it down in and I bring it out, it will drain the glaze out the opposite side. If I were to grab the bottom portion and do the same thing, when I submerge it, it usually plunges, and that air that's inside will cause it to splatter or bubble, and glaze goes everywhere. Plus, when you empty it out, then it pours down the tongs and onto your hands. So hold it up like this. Go ahead and grasp the top part of it. And for our glazes, we are going to hold it in for a count of 1001, 1002, 1003. So give your glaze one more stir, make sure it's mixed up well. And then we're going to go ahead and we're just going to go ahead and gently submerge this down into the bucket all the way. Count 1001, 1002, 1003, and then go ahead and pull that up out of there. And then just hold it over the bucket until it stops dripping. Once it stops dripping, then have a paper towel handy to the side. You're going to set it down on the paper towel, and then I use 2 hands to open the tongs. It's a little easier to control that way, and remove them so that the tongs don't hit the sides of the project and end up scraping it. So at this point, I let that sit there for about 3-4 minutes until it's good and dry. And once it's good and dry, then I will go over and clean the bottom off and remove the glaze from the bottom, and then it will be all set to go into the fire. All right, hope that helps you guys out, gives you a simple demonstration on how we glaze our projects. All right, we're over here at the sink now. Our project that we just glazed is dry now. You can see it's uniform in its light color. If you have areas that are still dark, that means that the glaze is still moist and it hasn't dried completely, and you want to hold off on it. So what we're going to do is we are going to clean the glaze off the bottom. We need to remove the glaze off the bottom because it is going to sit on a kiln shelf, and if there's any, as it's fired, and if there's any glaze left on there, it is going to cause it to melt and stick to the kiln shelf. And then the only way we really can remove it from the kiln shelf is usually by chipping it or damaging the project. So we want to remove all the glaze off the bottom. So the easiest way to do this is bring it over to the sink. I have a large sponge down in the sink. You're just going to flood that sponge with water, okay? And then what you're going to do is take your project, set it on top of that sponge, and you're just going to go ahead, hold the sponge steady if you need to so it doesn't spin or move, and then just go ahead and take your hand and carefully, as you touch the rim or the sides of your project, just go ahead and spin this on the sponge and drag it away, and then take a look at it and see. Usually that's enough to remove all of the glaze off of your project. However, sometimes you may want to go ahead and clean your sponge out and then go over it a second time, just to make sure you're getting all of the glaze removed from the bottom of your project. You don't need to push down, just let it rest there by its own weight, and then just carefully drag it and make sure that you remove all the glaze off the bottom. Now we do want to try and take a little glaze up this outside edge just slightly, and because of the weight of the project, its own weight sinking down into the sponge, as you spin it, that will usually happen automatically. If it doesn't, maybe your project is super light, doesn't weigh a whole lot, then just press down slightly as you're spinning it. The other option is you can take your small yellow sponge. If you need to clean up an area, get it wet and go ahead and clean it up. Or you can take that sponge up that outside edge slightly and just drag it and smooth and remove some of the glaze. Keep rinsing your sponge as you do it because we don't want any glaze residue left on the bottom. Now, one last thing here. As your project dries, you may be able to see, if the video picks this up, that there are a couple little marks that the tongs leave. Now, when it's completely dry, usually best if you wait a full day, but when it's completely dry, you can take your finger and you can just lightly smooth over where those little marks are, and it will smooth them out so that you don't have to worry about them showing up when it's fired. Sometimes if you don't do this, because the tongs may have dripped an extra little bit of glaze there, it may come out a little brighter color, a little darker color. Also, they'll do the same thing on the inside. Just lightly rub over it. Now, if you held onto the project with the tongs until it was fully dry and then you remove the tongs, usually you'll see two spots here where the glaze actually breaks away or holds on to the tongs, and so you have kind of a bare spot here. If that does happen, once it's dry, go stir the glaze up again, dab your finger into the glaze, dab it on the spot where it removed the glaze or where the tong mark was. Dab your finger in the glaze, dab it on the tong mark. Don't try to paint with it or smear it. Just dab, dab, and that'll be enough that it'll cover that spot, and then it'll be all good to go. So at this point, this one's nicely cleaned off, and it is all set to go into the kiln to be glaze fired. All right, hope that helps you out, and we'll see you in the next video.